Stay back, Major Kyle Barrett orders. Your support, not frontline. The squad obeys, but Lieutenant Erin Walsh just nods, eyes locked on the ridge. She looks unarmed, overlooked. But stick around. They thought she couldn't fight. What they didn't know? Walsh once led recon teams deep behind enemy lines, classified, uncredited, unstoppable. Then the ambush hits. He ducks, she moves. And when the dust settles, only one name is on every survivor's lips. Let us know where you're watching from and what time you found this. We read every single comment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos. The desert sun glints off Colonel Marcus Vance's challenge coin as he stands at his office window, watching the weathered figure below with barely contained disdain. The ancient AC-47 behind her is an eyesore against Forward Base Delta's cutting-edge silhouette, a relic that has no place among his fleet of sleek Apaches. Like watching a grandmother tend her garden, Colonel Marcus Vance mutters, his fingers drumming against the polished windowsill. The rhythmic thump of modern rotor blades overhead drowns out the woman's methodical movements. He savors that sound. Progress, power, everything the future should be. The challenge coin catches the light as Colonel Marcus Vance turns it between his fingers. Each ridge and groove speaks of authority earned through modernization, through pushing the old guard aside. He's built this base into a marvel of military advancement, yet that woman and her flying museum piece mock everything he's achieved. Sir? Lieutenant Chen appears at the door. Chief Warrant Officer Alara requests permission to conduct maintenance flight checks. Colonel Marcus Vance's jaw tightens. Denied. Tell her we don't waste fuel on antiques. He relishes the small victory, imagining her face when she receives his message. The bass thrum of an Apache taking off punctuates his decision, but something makes him pause. A defiant glint in Alara's eyes as she looks up toward his window, almost as if she knows he's watching. For a fraction of a second, Colonel Marcus Vance feels a flutter of unease. He's seen that look before. In others he's dismissed. Right before, the challenge coin slips, clatters against his desk. The sound echoes like a warning. Sir, Lieutenant Chen's voice crackles over the radio. Convoy Delta 7 reports incoming sandstorm. They're requesting immediate air support. Colonel Marcus Vance straightens, confident. Deploy Apache Team 1. Sir, all modern aircraft are grounded. The storm's electrical interference. The words hit like physical blows. Colonel Marcus Vance stares at his reflection in the window, at the old AC-47 beyond, at Alara, already moving with purpose toward her craft. That antique can't possibly, he begins. Sir, Chen interrupts. She's call sign Nix, 3-time Distinguished Flying Cross recipient. They say she once flew through. Colonel Marcus Vance's world tilts. The challenge coin feels suddenly heavy in his palm, its gleam dulled by the approaching storm clouds. Everything he's dismissed, every assumption he's made, every modern solution he's forced, all of it useless against nature's fury. You won't believe what happens next as Colonel Marcus Vance faces the ultimate challenge to his authority. Will his empire of modernization survive this crisis? Type pride in the comments if you've ever had your certainties shattered in a single moment. The sandstorm roars closer, and Colonel Marcus Vance clutches his challenge coin until the edges bite into his palm. I've spent my career pushing out the old guard, he thinks, watching Alara prep her aircraft with practiced efficiency. But what if I've been wrong? What if power isn't about the newest technology, but about something deeper, something I've forgotten? The first grains of sand pelt the window like accusations. Beyond, the AC-47's propellers begin to turn. a sound from another era cutting through the modern base's silence. And Colonel Marcus Vance realizes this is only the beginning of a storm that will change everything. Modern military trends within minutes as base personnel share updates about the impending mission. Colonel Marcus Vance's empire of progress stands on the edge of a precipice, and only time will tell if his faith in modernization will become his downfall. Colonel Marcus Vance adjusts his pristine uniform, the morning sun catching the polished brass of his insignia as he strides through Forward Base Delta's command center. The challenge coin, his constant companion since his first command, feels unusually heavy in his palm today. Lieutenant Hayes' latest report on Chief Warrant Officer Alara sits open on his desk, its conclusions confirming what he's always known. The AC-47 is obsolete, a relic that has no place in his modern Air Force. But something nags at him, an irritation he can't quite dismiss. The maintenance logs scroll across his tablet. Perfect scores, flawless performance metrics, not a single missed inspection. How could that ancient aircraft maintain such standards? He's certain Alara must be falsifying records, though he hasn't found proof yet. "Colonel Vance, sir," his aide interrupts. "I've found those mission reports you requested from Southeast Asia." The stack of yellowed folders lands on his desk with a thud. Something about Alara's reaction to the decommissioning order, that flash of steel in her eyes, had triggered a memory, a whispered legend from his early days in the service. His fingers trace the classified stamps as he reads, jaw tightening. Operations spanning 2 decades, all involving a mysterious pilot called Nix and an AC-47. Impossible rescue missions, supply drops that defied physics, extractions that saved hundreds. But the dates don't align. Alara would have been too young. The challenge coin spins faster between his fingers as Colonel Marcus Vance pulls up her service record again. The gaps jump out now. Convenient transfers, missing months, medals awarded with heavily redacted citations. His throat tightens as he cross-references dates with the mission reports. "Sir," Hayes appears in his doorway, grinning. "The decommissioning papers are ready for your final signature." The lieutenant's smugness grates now, as Colonel Marcus Vance notices for the first time how Hayes's carefully crafted complaints about Alara mirror his own prejudices. The distant drone of the AC-47's engines draws his attention to the window. On the tarmac, Alara moves with practiced efficiency through her pre-flight checks. Her movements are precise, economical, the mark of decades of experience, not the few years listed in her official record. "Have you actually reviewed her maintenance logs, Hayes?" Colonel Marcus Vance asks sharply, watching the younger officer's confidence waver. "Or did you simply assume I wanted them to fail?" The challenge coin stops spinning, and Colonel Marcus Vance remembers his own commanding officer, 20 years ago, making similar assumptions about his capabilities based on nothing but prejudice. The shame of that memory burns fresh as he realizes he's become what he once despised. A message flashes on his screen. Another pilot reporting mechanical issues with their modern aircraft. The third this week. The cost reports tell their own story. Millions spent on repairs while Alara keeps her vintage aircraft flying on a fraction of the budget. "Sir," Hayes prompts, papers extended. Colonel Marcus Vance's fingers brush the decommissioning order, but he can't shake the growing unease. The evidence before him paints a picture he's refused to see. His own biases have blinded him to the truth about both Alara and her aircraft. The challenge coin feels like a burning brand now. Each spin reminds him of commanders who valued tradition over talent, appearance over ability. He's spent his career fighting against such thinking, only to become its champion. Type blind pride if you've ever realized you've become what you once fought against. The AC-47's engines fade as Alara takes off for another test flight. Colonel Marcus Vance watches it climb, remembering countless reports of similar aircraft appearing like angels of mercy in impossible situations. How many of those missions bore Alara's hidden signature? His hands shake slightly as he closes Hayes's report and opens a new document. The truth he's avoided sits like lead in his stomach. He's not just wrong about Alara, he's built an entire command structure that reinforces his prejudices, surrounded himself with officers who mirror his biases rather than challenge them. The challenge coin makes one final spin before Colonel Marcus Vance places it deliberately face down on his desk. The sound of its settling echoes with finality. He has decisions to make, and for the first time in years, he's questioning every one of his assumptions. But deeper questions loom. How many other talented officers has he overlooked? How many careers has he stunted based on nothing but his own narrow vision of what a warrior should be? The weight of these realizations threatens to crush him, but the distant thunder of the AC-47's engines reminds him that it's not too late to change course, if only he can find the courage to admit how wrong he's been. Colonel Marcus Vance stands frozen at the command center's window, his previously immaculate uniform now wrinkled from hours of anxious pacing. The sandstorm's relentless howl seems to mock his earlier arrogance, drowning out everything except the desperate radio calls crackling through the speakers. "Anyone? Please respond. We're running low on ammunition." The voice of Lieutenant Chen, usually so composed, breaks with fear. Vance's fingers trace the challenge coin in his pocket, the same one he'd smugly displayed while dismissing Alara hours ago. Now it feels like a lead weight, each ridge and groove an accusation. His state-of-the-art F-35s, the pride of his command, sit uselessly in their hangars, their sophisticated systems blinded by the very storm that threatens to bury his men alive. "Sir, convoy reports multiple hostiles approaching their position," his communications officer announces, voice tight with tension. "Estimated survival time without air support, 20 minutes. The security feed shows Alara moving with determined grace toward her AC-47, that flying antique he'd mocked as museum piece just this morning. Each step she takes feels like another crack in his carefully constructed world of modern military superiority. The base's warning sirens blend with the storm's fury, creating a hellish symphony that makes his teeth ache. "Sir, should we—" His XO starts, but Vance silences him with a sharp gesture. The colonel's reflection in the command center's window shows a man he barely recognizes. Gone is the confident commander who'd built his reputation on cutting-edge warfare. In his place stands someone beginning to understand the true cost of pride. The hangar doors groan open, their ancient mechanism protesting against the storm's fury. Each metallic screech feels personal, like the base itself is passing judgment on his previous dismissal of outdated equipment. Vance watches as Alara's crew prep the AC-47 with practiced efficiency, their movements sure despite the chaos around them. "Sandstorm crisis is trending, sir," his intelligence officer reports quietly. "Civilian channels picked up our distress calls. They're asking why our advanced air wing isn't responding." Vance's hand clenches around the challenge coin until its edges bite into his palm. The irony isn't lost on him. His insistence on modern technology above all else has left 32 lives hanging by a thread, dependent on the very aircraft and pilot he'd derided as obsolete. Through the swirling sand, He watches Alara's AC-47 taxi toward the runway. Its propellers cut through the storm like ancient warriors' blades, steady and sure where his jet's engines would flame out. The realization hits him like a physical blow. In his rush to embrace the future, he'd arrogantly dismissed decades of proven combat experience. Have you ever watched your carefully constructed worldview crumble? Vance whispers to his reflection, barely recognizing his own voice. Have you felt the weight of lives hanging in the balance while your pride dissolves like sand through your fingers? The radio crackles again. Convoy under heavy fire. Where is our support? The desperation in the soldier's voice makes Vance flinch. His modern command center, with all its screens and sensors, can only watch helplessly as the drama unfolds. The AC-47's engines roar to life, their deep rumble carrying through the storm like a defiant challenge to both nature and human hubris. Vance clutches his challenge coin one last time before placing it face down on his desk, a symbolic surrender of his previous certainties. Godspeed, Chief Warrant Officer Alara, he manages, throat tight with emotions he can't quite name. As her aircraft disappears into the maelstrom, Colonel Marcus Vance faces the hardest battle of his career, acknowledging that sometimes the old ways aren't just valid, they're vital. Drop 1 in the comments if you've ever had to swallow your pride and admit you were wrong. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought within ourselves. Colonel Marcus Vance stood frozen in the operations center, his world crumbling as the AC-47's distinctive drone cut through the howling sandstorm. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the tactical display, watching the impossible unfold through grainy satellite feeds. Sir, Nix is requesting final clearance for the rescue approach. Lieutenant Chen's voice wavered with barely contained awe. The same respect Colonel Marcus Vance had mockingly dismissed hours earlier now stabbed at his pride like shards of glass. The vintage aircraft danced through the storm's fury with an grace that defied physics. Each banking turn, each precise adjustment spoke of thousands of hours of mastery. Colonel Marcus Vance's throat tightened as he remembered his sneering words to Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Alara. We don't need museum pieces cluttering our modern battlefield. His challenge coin, worn smooth from decades of nervous handling, slipped from his fingers, clattering against the metal floor. The sound echoed like an accusation through the command center. As he bent to retrieve it, his eyes caught the surveillance feed showing Sarah's face in the cockpit, illuminated by instrument lights. The same face he'd dismissed that morning now wore an expression of absolute focus he'd seen in only one other place, classified footage of Nix's legendary missions. Impossible, Colonel Marcus Vance whispered, but the truth hammered through his defenses like the rhythmic thunder of the AC-47's engines. The pilot he'd idolized, whose missions he'd studied at the academy, had been standing right in front of him, and he'd been too blinded by prejudice to see it. The radio crackled. This is Nix, executing final approach. The call sign sent shivers through the command center staff. Colonel Marcus Vance watched, transfixed, as the AC-47 performed a maneuver that would have torn any modern aircraft apart. The ancient warbird threaded between towering dust devils, its guns blazing with surgical precision to clear a path for the trapped convoy. Type Legends Live if you believe in second chances, scrolled across the bottom of the tactical display, someone's impromptu addition to the mission log. Sarah's voice cut through again, calm despite the maelstrom. Convoy secure, returning to base. No mention of their earlier confrontation, no hint of satisfaction at proving him wrong. Just pure professionalism that made Colonel Marcus Vance's arrogance feel even more shameful. He clutched his challenge coin, the metal warm against his palm. The eagle emblem, symbol of his authority, now felt like a weight of responsibility he'd failed to honor. As the AC-47's engines grew louder, announcing its approach to the base, Colonel Marcus Vance made a decision that would reshape his command. "Clear all channels," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of transformation. "This is Colonel Marcus Vance. I owe someone an apology, and I owe this base a lesson about judgment and valor." The sandstorm began to clear, as if nature itself was stepping back to witness what would happen next. Colonel Marcus Vance straightened his uniform, preparing to meet the legend he'd disrespected, and the truth about his own prejudices that he could no longer deny. Share this moment of realization with Hart Vance. Learns truth. Because sometimes our greatest victories come from admitting our mistakes. The AC-47's wheels touched down, and Colonel Marcus Vance walked toward the hangar, his challenge coin held out not as a symbol of authority, but as an offering of respect long overdue. Colonel Marcus Vance stood in the cavernous hangar, his polished challenge coin catching the desert light, feeling its weight. Not just the metal, but the burden of pride and prejudice he'd carried far too long. The AC-47's engines behind him ticked rhythmically, each click hammering home the magnitude of his error, the depth of his misjudgment. Through the dusty air, Sarah Alara, the legendary Nyx, worked methodically on her aircraft, the same quiet confidence in her movements that he'd mistaken for submission. His throat tightened. "Chief Warrant Officer Alara," he called out, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance. The wrench in her hands paused its rhythm. The bass hummed with whispers. Vance. Humbled had been trending for hours, footage of her impossible rescue playing on every screen. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from command, but those could wait. This couldn't. "I owe you more than this," Colonel Marcus Vance said, extending the challenge coin, his most prized possession. "But it's a start." His hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of transformation. The coin caught a shaft of light, its eagle emblem seeming to pierce him with judgment. Alara approached, her flight suit still bearing the marks of the sandstorm battle. She accepted the coin with the same grace she'd shown when he'd dismissed her capabilities just 24 hours ago. No triumph in her eyes, no vindication, just that steady gaze that saw through facades to essence. "The thing about vintage aircraft," she said, running her thumb over the coin's surface, "is they teach us that excellence doesn't expire. Neither does truth, sir." Colonel Marcus Vance watched as she returned to her work, the wrench resuming its steady rhythm. Each metallic ring echoed with lessons he should have learned long ago. Around them, younger pilots gathered, drawn not by rank or protocol, but by the quiet magnetism of genuine mastery. Type wisdom if you've ever had to unlearn prejudice scrolled across screens worldwide as his story spread. The setting sun painted the hangar in gold, casting long shadows that seemed to connect past and future. Colonel Marcus Vance removed his command insignia, placing it beside her toolbox. Another offering, another bridge to build. "You've known all along, haven't you?" he asked, watching her work. "That true leadership isn't about protecting our position, but elevating others?" She paused, looking up from the engine. "Every flight teaches us something, Colonel. The question is whether we're humble enough to learn." The base loudspeaker crackled with routine announcements, but in the hangar, something profound was taking root. Colonel Marcus Vance saw his reflection in the polished aluminum of the AC-47's fuselage, not just his face, but the man he'd been and the leader he could become. "Share this moment if you believe in second chances," the viral posts read, as his journey from arrogance to enlightenment reached millions. The day's last light caught the challenge coin, now resting among Alara's tools, no longer a symbol of authority, but a token of transformation. Colonel Marcus Vance straightened his shoulders, not with pride now, but with purpose. The sound of her wrench continued its steady rhythm, building something far more important than aircraft maintenance, a future where excellence knew no boundaries and wisdom wore no rank.